Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for attending. I'm Rachel Middleman. I'm the director of the Humanities Center and a faculty member in the Department of Art and Art History. I'd like to thank our major sponsors, Tom and Carol DiGiovanni and New Urban Builders, who've been supporting the Humanities Center for many years. And thank you to all of our donors and to Dean Tracy Butts and the College of Humanities and Fine Arts. We're grateful for all contributions, so if you would like to contribute and you're in a position to do so, then there will be a link in the chat where you can make a gift online. We acknowledge and are mindful that CSU Chico stands on lands that were originally occupied by the first people of this area, the Mechoopda, and we recognize their distinctive spiritual relationship with this land and the waters that run through campus. We're humbled that our campus resides on sacred lands that once sustained the Mechoopda people for centuries. The Humanities Center's purpose is to create and nurture an interdisciplinary culture of ideas, and our theme for the next 2 years is art and social change. With this theme, we seek to inspire discussion about the ways that art can help us understand the past, engage with current social concerns, and envision the future. We are thrilled to have Sameera Iyengar here to speak with us tonight, and Dr. Daniel Weidlinger will introduce her in a minute. I want to tell you though about our next event, which will be a talk by Daniel for the Humanities Center Digital Humanities series, which is co-sponsored with Miriam Library. And that will be on the topic of gender bias in the language used by entrepreneurship programs. That event will be on Wednesday, November 4th. Please see our website or Facebook page for the details and Zoom link. All right, now to you, Daniel.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for coming. I'm really happy to have our guest, Dr. Sameera Iyengar, here today. And I first met our guest when we were both graduate students at the University of Chicago in the Department of South Asian Languages and Civilizations, where she was doing a PhD on feminist theater in India. What I did not know at the time was that as an undergraduate, she majored in mathematics at MIT. So it's apparent that she has a very wide range of interests, some of it which we will be privileged to today. For many years now, she has been chronicling theater in India and has produced exhibitions, yearbooks, and booklets designed to build public appreciation and knowledge of theater and performance, including co-editing the volume Our Stage, The Pleasures and Perils of Theater Practice in India Today, and writing for the Seagull Theater Quarterly. Sameera has been part of the founding teams of the India Theater Forum and SMART, which stands for Strategic Management in the Art of Theater. These are organizations that were created to strengthen the theater ecosystem in India. She was the first course director of SMART and continues as a core team member and facilitator. In 2012, Sameera co-founded a theater initiative called Janoon, with the express aim of sharing the richness of arts in India and bridging the gap between arts, artists, and audiences. She has also worked at Prithvi Theatre, where she conceptualized, curated, and ran festivals and workshops for children. Presently, she continues to explore ideas with equally play-inspired collaborators to strengthen, share, and celebrate theater and performance in India. Today's talk, entitled Of the People, By the People, For the People, Theater, Community, Solidarity, and Play, will look at how theater has continued to seek change amidst the complexities of life in India. And Sameera is speaking to us today from Calcutta, India. Welcome, Sameera.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you very much, the Chico Humanities Center, for inviting me to give this talk. I wanted to start off by saying it's a pleasure to be here, but then I was thinking about what does being here mean today, because all of us are sort of here somewhere in the cloud. And then, I'm also here in Calcutta in a completely different time zone than all of you. So it's interesting but it's nice, very nice to be here. And thank you, all of you, for attending. Today's talk is about theater and performance, and theater and performance are fundamentally here practices. They are people gather here in a space together to perform, to watch, to experience. And the pandemic has really thrown a severe challenge at all the people who practice theater, both in India and elsewhere in the world. So it's a bit, I was thinking that it's a strange time to be talking about theater practice when theater practice itself is so much on hold in so many parts of the world. My talk today, therefore, will be talking, I want to acknowledge that the talk today will be talking about what has happened, what theater groups are doing right now, what the theater groups that I'm talking about are doing right now, but I will not be able to talk about the future. We haven't, that is yet to evolve. We have to see what our collective creativity brings about. So I want to put that on the table. I'm just going to start by screen sharing. Give me a second, please. Okay, so I thought I would start off by just introducing, the performance landscape in India a little bit for those of you who may not be so familiar with India, just to give you a little bit of an introduction into sort of the diversity that makes up this country and which is part of our everyday lives. India, as you may know, is the 7th largest country in the world. It's about 1/3 the size of, just a little more than 1/3 the size of the US. We have a population, as of 2018, our population was 1.352 million people, which is more than 4 times the size of the population of the US. This, one second, sorry. Yes. This map, oh, hello. Okay, sorry. Okay. This map that I'm showing you shows you the way the states in India are distributed. This is the 28 states of India and the Union Territories of India. I wanted to show you this map because I wanted to place on it this further map, which shows you the way language is distributed across India. These are the major languages spoken in those states. But do remember that Indians are multilingual. So each Indian is likely to be speaking 2 to 3 languages at least. The latest census of India, which was in 2011, actually returned data on languages. And it's a very complex way that data is done, where it returned data that was rationalized into 1,369 recognized mother tongues. And that was further grouped in terms of how many people spoke into 121 languages. The census also recognized 1,474 other mother tongues, which is not coming into this grouping. So what you're really looking at when you're looking at this map is a language. This is just the major language distribution. In here is also all these other languages, all these other mother tongues that are distributed across the country. So why am I focusing so much on language? Language expresses culture. Languages are actually windows into culture, and cultures have their own expressions. In India, where languages are constantly colliding and mixing, you're also constantly getting new expressions being created. So if you think about the fact that there are 1.3 million, there are 1.369 recognized languages. This is a minimum number. And there are 1.1369 mother tongues and 121 languages. You have to ask, how many expressions are there really? That's one thing. The second thing is that India is, it has been a deeply oral culture for a very, very long time. And even though, Western education with writing, etc., has come in, we still remain a deeply oral culture. Part of that means that we love hearing stories. Stories abound in our culture. A lot of learning, exchange, discourse, ways to navigate the world, all of that happens through stories. These stories, who are these stories? How do these stories come to us? They come to us through our grandmothers, through elders in the family, through elders in the community, and regularly they come to us through performances and by performance groups. So what I would now like to do is give you a little bit of a quick sort of a look at a glimpse actually at the performance landscape that is India. There's a lovely little video that 2 young high school students in Calcutta, rallied around and made for me. It won't be exactly in keeping with what I'm going to be saying, but do enjoy. I hope it gives you a visual sense, of what we're speaking about. India is home to 2 of the oldest epics in the world, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and these have been performed across the Indian landscape for centuries. And I'm saying India, but actually the South Asian landscape and beyond. And they've been there in performance cultures. they live on today, those old performance cultures, newer cultures, urban retellings, and they get passed on from storyteller to storyteller, across geography and language. Um, there is, as you saw earlier, single storyteller forms like the Pandwari from Chhattisgarh. In other places, you have troops of performers who regale you with the all-night Mahabharat for 18 days of the war. In northern India, you have the Ramayana is played out through something called the Ram Leela, which is a public performance where locals become the characters in the Ramayana, and the whole city turns out to, everybody turns out to watch these performances. Um, you also have regional and local stories that coexist with the epics. The Nacha in Madhya Pradesh which is central India, is a strong satirical social commentary theatre form. In Tamil Nadu, you have Isai Nadagam, which tells mythologies. You have other Nataka Mandrams who are very happy to adapt film stories and novels. In Assam, you have a mobile theatre, which carries the actual physical theatre across the state of Assam for 9 months in the year, and they have been known to adapt Jurassic Park and the Titanic. Popular theatre forms exist across India. You have the Jatra in Bengal, we just saw those images. You have the Shumang Leela in Manipur. You have Tamasha in Maharashtra. You have Bhai in Gujarat. You have so much more. We also just passed Kudiyattam and Kathakali. Those are what are called the classical forms, which have been around for thousands of years and are highly codified forms, but they live on today. They're not museumized pieces, they're living forms. Then you have the puppetry that we're looking at, rod puppets, string puppets, shadow puppets, and more. India is home to the most number of puppetry forms in the world and some of the oldest forms. Um, you also have wandering storytellers like this lady telling the Patachitra against painted scrolls, or this gentleman with the kavod, which is a wooden box that is painted again, and you refer to those boxes and those scrolls to tell your stories. Then you add to that the urban theater practices that happened, that were that came about after the proscenium theater came to India. Then you had black box and experimental spaces, and they are also creating a certain theater idiom, which might look closer to what you're used to, but may not look closer to what you're used to. But they're also in conversation with all the other forms that exist in the country, sometimes actively taking from them, sometimes going in a completely different direction and creating new languages. So this is just a small glimpse of theater that happens across India. It's you have to just think of the map I showed you and think of the fact that wherever you go, language and culture is changing across space. Literally, like a language, the dialect of language changes very, very fast as you move across the Indian landscape, and therefore performance both overlaps, they collide, they learn from each other, but they also keep dynamically changing, and this is what you see in the landscape that is India. Um, I don't know why this continued again, so I'm going to try and move on to the, you please, yeah, thank you. Okay, so I want to move on to the next section, where I want to talk about 5 examples of theater for change from India. But first, I would like to talk about the Indian People's Theatre Association, which is in many ways the foundational thinking for theater for change in India. India got independence in 1947. In 1942, there was a mass movement which was called the Quit India movement, where Indians finally asked the British to leave. Till then, there was still enough people who were thinking that perhaps we can all live on together, like so many people had lived on together in the subcontinent before then. In 1942, after the Quit India movement, which was during World War II, actually, we then had, 1942 was the Quit India movement. 1943, the Indian Theatre People's Association was founded. As this report states very clearly, what was the reason behind the Indian Theatre People's Association, what we call the IPTA. IPTA brought together all the progressive artists from the field of music, theatre, film. They came together, those who grouped together in our movement were inspired by a deep and abiding faith that our ancient culture cannot be allowed to die, that it must be used to serve and save our people, that art can and should flourish not as a weapon of luxury, but as a means of portraying life and reality of our people, of reviving their faith in themselves and their past, and of rousing them to the will to live and the will to be free. So this is IPTA, just 5 years before independence of India. Um, IPTA squads were set up across the country. It was a very loose association of artists that came together. They had squads set up across the country. They went into villages, towns, and cities. Again, please remember, India was an oral culture. Not everybody was literate. That still remains the case today, even though literacy has gone up. So the IPTA squads moved across the country, creating new forms of theatrical expression, taking from local idioms to better communicate with local people, speaking out against atrocities and social issues. Their intent was to work towards a cultural awakening of the people of pre and post-independence India. Many great artists that set the trends for theater performance in India came out of the IPTA movement. While IPTA itself broke up in the 1950s, what they had done, they had laid such powerful foundations of an attitude towards theater, towards a social and artistic attitude towards theater, that went on to deeply influence a lot of the theater movements that came up in the future. Now on to the first group that I really want to talk to you about. This group is called Jannatyam Manch. It was established in 1973 in Delhi by radical theater amateurs who were inspired by IPTA. Jannatyam Manch is a group that has been responsible for establishing street theater as a major theater for change strategy in India. They began their work on stage plays on makeshift stages in the open air spaces, but very quickly moved on to a street theater idiom. You know, their plays, they address current issues such as price rise, elections, unemployment. They also build awareness on issues such as economic policy, trade unions and trade union rights and women's rights. And yet other plays are created that try to make visible the structures underlying communalism, globalization, the education system, capitalism, workers' exploitation, and so on. Sometimes their plays are created in concert with calls by the Communist Party of India, the CPIM, with whom they are affiliated. At other times, they are making standalone creations to build awareness. Through theater, Janam sees itself as a part of and contributing to the growing democratic movement in the country, promoting a democratic, secular, and scientific consciousness among the people. Now, what's unique about Janam is right from the very beginning, they were very clear that theater was an art form that they were mobilizing. They were certainly going to be political and partisan, but their plays were not going to be simply didactic. They were clear that they wanted to provide robust entertainment. So if you look at the pictures, you'll see how Janam performs in these open air spaces with huge numbers of people. And if anyone's been to India, you'll know that the noise levels are not low, especially in the cities. So Janam has come up with a theater aesthetic that is extremely powerful. They use powerful gestures, strong silences, visually engaging blocking and tableaus, and very selective prop and costume elements. And these help them to capture the attention of those audiences who are gathered there. Remember that they are competing with all the noise and the bustle of the city. Over nearly 5 decades, Janam has done over 8,500 performances of more than 80 street plays and 16 proscenium plays. They've traveled to approximately 140 cities in India. Their performances happen through the wide network of mass organizations that they are connected to, including trade unions. They're also connected to educational institutions. They get invited when they create new plays. They reach out to these organizations and they perform in this way. They don't charge fees. They pass the metaphorical hat around. In India, that what they do basically is they have a cloth you'll see around their shoulders. They open the cloth out and hand it to the audience. So all the money they receive is whatever the audience wishes to put in. Of course, you know, when we ran the Prithvi Festival and we invited them, we would give them a fee, and they will take fees from different organizations. On average, Janam creates about 2 to 3 performances a year, and they perform about 150 to 250 times a year, even though they have also done 300 performances a year. Janam, and in the south of India, a theatre group called Samudaya, which came up around the same time, a street theatre group. These two groups have been the reason for street theatre having a huge impetus in the country. Today, you will find street theatre groups dotted across the country. The quality of work, the understanding of theatre, all of that certainly varies, but street theatre is clearly seen as a vital mode of theatre for change in India. And these guys are the people who are responsible for that. Moving on. Now, next, I would like to talk about Jana Sanskriti. Janam was established in Delhi, the north of India. Jana Sanskriti is established in the rural areas of West Bengal, which is in the east of India. They practice a participative form of theater called forum theater. What is forum theater? Forum theater was actually founded by Augusto Boal under the larger umbrella of Theatre of the Oppressed. And forum theater seeks very hard, they want to make spectators into spect actors. They don't want spectators to be passive viewers of the performance. So what they do is they take local issues um, and build the local issues up to a climax. And then they pause the local issue on the climax. At that moment, a character called the Joker invites audience participation. Audiences are asked to come in and offer solutions. However, they cannot speak the solutions. They have to replace a character who's on the stage and enact the solution. Um, the actors who are on to provide obstacles to these solutions, right? So every time a solution is proposed, there is a rebuttal of that solution. Um, this allows you to push aside simpler solutions and go deeper and deeper and deeper into finding practicable solutions. Um, Audience members keep coming on stage, replacing characters. This kind of back and forth between the actors and the audience members goes on till you arrive at a deeper understanding of the situation at hand, maybe some kind of practicable solution, and then the forum is stopped. But in this way, what is happening is the spectator is being invited into actively, physically being invited into the conversation that is happening on stage. They're acting, if only on stage, but they're acting, they're not just listening. Um, and this is what is meant by being called spect actors. The change Jana Sanskriti seeks is in their audience. Their artistic director, Sanjay Ganguly, explains. The reason we debate with people, hold discussions with them, is to force them to actively think about solutions to their problems, to not be passive in the face of their problems, to awaken their power of judgment or critique. Our very commitment to this political agenda, that we will not remain passive towards the problems that bother us, is responsible for our taking up this challenge. The underlying belief is that every individual has a latent, what Sanjay calls perfection, waiting to be discovered and manifested. Their theater seeks to unlock this in people and unleash their capacity to be confident actors in the world. Um, in the 35 years that Jana Sanskriti has been around, their plays have addressed a variety of issues, including domestic violence, child marriage, girl-child trafficking, child abuse, maternal and child health, primary education, healthcare, illicit liquor, all local issues, that are relevant to the people in the rural areas that they work in. Uh, these plays are performed by a number of teams. Janam has one team. Jana Saraswati has a number of teams. They have about 30 satellite teams across the villages of West Bengal, of which 9 are all women teams, which is perhaps the first in the world. They also have teams in 9 other states spanning the country from the northeast to the north to the west to the south. Augusto Boal, the founder of Forum Theatre himself, has recognized Jana Sanskriti as the largest and longest forum theatre operation running in the world. Across their teams, they average about 1,000 shows a year. Today, Jana Sanskriti is a key player in the international network of forum theatre. They have a center. People come from across the world for their festivals, for their training workshops. They have also introduced aesthetics into forum theatre. They work very closely with local idioms, local practices, and bring that into their performance as a way of being, in a sense, from the people. They offer workshops. The satellite, you'll see the picture on the bottom left. That's a workshop going on with villagers in Purulia. They offer workshops to people who want to join. People who want to join have to approach them. They do not go out and proselytize. When people come forward and say, we would like to do this kind of theater in our area, they will then train those people, stay in touch, and those become their satellite teams. The next theater that I would like to speak to you about is a theater called Budhan Theater. In India, there are today 60 million nomadic tribes who live in 60 million people of nomadic tribes who live in India. In 1871, the British colonial government passed a law branding these people as born criminals. They were called the criminal tribes, and there was an act that was put in place. These tribes were either forcibly settled in guarded settlements. If they refused to be settled, they risked being shot at sight. 5 years after independence, in 1952, the Indian government finally denotified the tribes, removed the tag of criminal from them. However, just 7 years later, in 1959, they were given a new tag, that of the Habitual Offenders Act. This label, this stigma, the criminal label haunts them till date. It makes it very difficult for them to get jobs. They are not trusted socially. They face a lot of social injustice. If any robbery or crime happens in their area, it's very easy for police to just come and pick them up and put them in jail. And it's very easy for the judge to say, oh, of course, they're from this tribe and therefore they must be criminals. Often the offenses are non-bailable offenses. So they're people who live under a huge amount of insecurity and injustice. So in 1998, writer and social activist from Bengal, Mahashweta Devi, who all her life worked very, very closely for the rights of tribes, visited Charanagar, the area that Buddhan Theatre lives in. Um, that visit was a turning point for the young man Dakshin Chara, who realized from his conversations with her about the injustices that his tribe, the Charas, were facing, and about the work that needed to be done to remove the stigma and make people aware of their rights to claim their rights. Soon after, in that same year, Buddhan Theatre launched their first play, which was again suggested by Devi. It was a play about Buddhan, a young tribal from the Sabar tribe in West Bengal who had died in police custody, and the courts later indicted the police for torture. The play ended with the actors repeatedly asking, "Are we second-class citizens?" and then demanding, "We want respect." Dakshin feels that theatre accomplishes a number of things for his community. Um, the first thing we have to recognize is that the social stigma, the injustice, the ostracism has gone on for so long that is norm for his community. It is seen as normal. That is how that is what their everyday life is about. So what he feels is that when he takes theater and he puts a magnifying lens on theater and plays back the issues the community faces to them, uh, that normalcy, the theater helps moves that sense of normalcy. It helps them see the injustice, right? The people who create the theater are also young people from the community, or sometimes people from other oppressed groups also join them. In the act of creating those plays, some of which they write themselves, some of which they adapt. They've adapted Dario Fo, they have adapted, they've done his accidental death of an anarchist. They've adapted Maxim Gorky, they've adapted Mahashweta Devi's plays. These adaptations are done into their lives. They're brought into Chara lives. That's the context they're placed in. Um, and the young people who create these plays, in the act of creating those plays, are also going through a huge consciousness building, right? They're beginning to understand and analyze the problems and the injustices that they face. Every time a play is created, it is first performed, as you see in the top right, is first performed for the Chara community. So this helps the actors refine their plays, but it also helps them um, share their place with the community that is their primary community, the community that they work for. Uh, when they see issues in the city of Ahmedabad where they're from, which relate to the place they've created, they take their place to those areas. And in those areas, for other tribes, for other oppressed communities, they also help this sort of removing of normalcy to happen. Sometimes if a play is invited by somebody somewhere else, what they will often do is they will actually invite, if a play is talking about, say, housing issues, they will actually invite people who have had their houses broken down into the audience. If they're too poor, they will raise the funds to try and help them to come there, so that the audiences watching post-play will have the chance to have a conversation with the people who are actual victims of this kind of behavior. They'll see the victims in flesh and blood and have that conversation. Buddhan Theatre has done 52 productions so far. They tend to average about 5 performances a month, though they have done 36 performances in a month. One of the key things they see from their theatre practice is that community leaders grow out of this theatre practice. They feel that the actors who go through their work end up becoming community leaders. And the most recent and startling example of this was post a midnight raid that happened on Charanagar on 26 July 2018. The smartphone videos show police walking in and indiscriminately beating men, women, and children and destroying property. The Buddhan theatre actors at that point stood up and protested and courted arrest, even when others feared to do so. A lot of arrests of charas are non-bailable offenses, so it's not a small thing. The next day, the charas came out in full force. They organized a funeral procession, mourning the death of law and order. And they organized a silent rally that took, with more than 5,000 charas participating, which went all the way up to the police station to meet the police commissioner. This rally was led by Buddhan theatre actors. The actors also took videos, they took testimonials, first-hand accounts of those who were injured, and used their social media and their media connections to amplify, to make sure that people knew what had happened from their point of view. They're confident enough about the model that they're working with to take it now to other DNT tribes, denotified tribes. They have started working with some tribes, and over time, they wish to make theater a very powerful tool in the hands of the entire DNT network, the DNT community. So I've been talking about theater groups for so long. Now I want to talk about a couple of theater institutions. This is Ninasam, set up in the south of India in Karnataka, Hegadu village. Ninasam was set up soon after independence. Right after independence in India, there were many people thinking about how to build India into the future. And one of them was Ram Manohar Lohia, who was a social activist and a politician, a freedom fighter and a politician. And he was very clear that village upliftment was central to the reconstruction of India, that villages could not be left out of the new India that was going to be built. And he exhorted educated people to return to their villages and to make sure to focus on this building of the village, on education, healthcare, industry, etc. And KV Subbanna of Hegadu was one of those people who heeded the call. Ninasam was established in 1949 by a small band of enthusiasts. Their idea was simply to bring the world to the village. In their logic, the village could not go to the world, and therefore the world had to come there. They began by establishing a small theater group and then followed it up about 2 decades later by building the building you see on the top left. My professor Michael is here, and he has gone and actually directed a play. He took 2 students from MIT and directed a play with the Ninasam students there. I threw him into a very small village in India for an experience that he bravely took on. The Theatre Institute was established in 1980. Once they had built the building, they said, "Oh, we have a building, so let's have more performances." So in 1980, they set up the Theatre Institute, which offers a 1-year diploma course. Then they said, "Okay, we have students, so we have to figure out how they do performances." And therefore, in 1985, they set up their traveling theatre company, the Tirugata. They did something extraordinary with that traveling theatre company. They built a circuit across the districts of Karnataka. They worked it out in such a way with local organizers that it did not hurt their pocket very badly. And as you see in the bottom right, they bought a theater bus, and that bus carries the entire troupe, and it carries all the sets, properties, costumes, whatever the troupe needs to travel. They perform one show every 50 to 100 kilometers, traveling across Karnataka. Which is about 120 shows in about 140 days. Till date, Ninasam has put up 99 productions, staged about 4,000 shows to an estimated audience of 2.5 million people. Ninasam acts as what Ninasam does every year is the 3 kinds of plays that they create 3 kinds of plays. They create Western plays, they take Western stories, they take stories from other parts of India, and then they take local Karnataka stories. All the plays are in Kannada. They create theater, which is, if you see on the top right, the theater performance pulls on Yakshagana, which is a local Kannada form, but they also push aesthetics. If you see on the bottom left, they play around with aesthetics. But they are very aware of the audience when they're creating shows. So their shows will be large productions, there will be music and dance, there will be a slightly hyper performance style, which is comfortable for the people of the state. And they're constantly thinking of them while they're creating the design for their productions. What is happening every year is that Ninasam's plays are traveling across Karnataka, and they're offering new stories. They're offering new worldviews. They're offering new windows into thought, culture, experience, and possibilities. And they're offering this to 120 sets of audience every year since Tirugata began. Through this spread of sharing of culture and cultural conversations, Ninasam acts as a bridge between the microcosm of rural Karnataka and the macrocosm of the world at large, enabling the village to be in concert with the nation and the rest of the globe. The village does not get left out. The last theatre institution association that I want to talk about is the Kattaikutu Sangam, which is set up in Kanchipuram in South India. Kattaikutu literally means theatre with wooden ornaments, and the crowns you see them wearing, the jewelry you see them wearing, the shoulder pads, those are all made actually out of wood. They focus on Mahabharat performances. The form is, we don't have actual dating on this. You go by, you go by generation speaking, etc. But it's probably approximately 300 years old. And it was traditionally performed by non-agrarian castes, barbers, washermen, mendicants. Um, these castes, I want to stop for a second and just pause on caste, which is these performers and other performers across rural India tend to be from lower caste, and caste, like race in the US, caste uh, is one of the structural scourges in our society. Caste discrimination is deeply embedded in the structure of our society, and it rears its ugly head across religions, even though it is mostly prevalent in the Hindu religion and comes from there. Um, what that means is that the children of most of these communities do not necessarily want to continue after being educated. They do not want to continue in these performances. They want professions that have far more dignity, uh, you know, far more dignity and far more stability. And that's part of what is happening to performance forms across India. Kathai Kuttu was founded in 1990 as an association of professional Kathai Kuttu performers. It is spearheaded by the couple, performer, director, teacher, and playwright P. Rajagopal and theatre scholar Hannah de Bruin. Uh, the premises of the Sangam served as a school, a meeting place, and a knowledge center for 18 years. Now, what's extraordinary, what the Kathai Kuttu Sangam did that was extraordinary, is they said they'll set up a school for teaching Kathai Kuttu, but that school was open to all children. Right, the school ended up catering to children who are from the most disadvantaged, the poorest and the most disadvantaged communities in Tamil Nadu. These children they're often children who fall outside the normal school system. These children were given foundational training in Kathai Kuttu performance. They were taught to play the musical instruments. A lot of the performers you see on stage, including the girl in the yellow sari on the top left image, are students of the Kathai Kuttu school, performing along with their teachers. Um, they Alongside this training in Kathai Kuttu, they also got formal education. So these were children who would have not got education, they now got double, right? And then they prioritized the admission of girls, which was again a first for Kathai Kuttu, because Kathai Kuttu traditionally is performed by all men. There were no women in Kathai Kuttu. As the website states, the foremost aim of the Gurukulam is to offer all children a safe environment where they can gain self-confidence and develop their academic and artistic potential to the full. It is here that formal education and embodied theatre training complement and reinforce each other to foster independent and critical thinking, sensorial and bodily awareness, and a sense of aesthetics. So today, they've run the school for 18 years. Now today, after 18 years, due to the pressure of funding, due to the difficulty of getting academic recognition, the school is sadly being shut down. However, we have to stop and see what has been happening for the last 2 decades. The Gurukulam has been responsible for training women artists. These women artists perform, as you see in the bottom right, in front of the village, right? The whole village gathers to watch the performance. This is part of practice in that space to watch the Kathai Kuttu performances. And they are seeing for the first time women performing with equal power and gusto. The performances are being reinterpreted, right, to bring in contemporary IQs. So where Draupadi would have been a submissive, Draupadi is one of the key characters in the Mahabharata, where she would have been shown as a submissive victim-like character before, now she's shown as a strong, independent, outspoken woman. These changes and characteristics are being put forth in front of the village audience. One of the women students of the Sangam has gone on to found her own Kathai Kuttu company, which is a first in Kathai Kuttu history. Then new stories have been brought in, a lot of stories for the environment, because that is what matters to Rajagopal. And village audiences have been watching and experiencing these changes for over 2 decades. The children themselves have come out confident of their performance, confident of their education, being able to meet equally with anyone they meet. And the Sangam has actively reached beyond their traditional audience. They have reached into urban spaces. They have made sure that they are visible. They have collaborated with classical music, which was a complete, it was completely a different world of performance, and a new collaboration has recently happened. And in that way, they have been establishing Kathai Kuttu as a form which might have been put aside as traditional, as, sort of gorgeous and India's history, but not really contemporary and equal to urban forms. They've been established, claiming their space, and they have been sort of challenging the caste divide, both of the performers and of the performance. For me, uh, these stories of theater for change that I have shared with you are stories that these are post-independent stories. They are stories of theater uh, reaching for democracy's promise. India is a nation, very young, a youngish nation. It's about just over 70 years old, but people have been here before the nation. Their traditions and cultures have deep roots, which are often difficult to shake. So while we are blessed with a constitution that offers us the conditions and promises of democracy, equal rights, equal opportunities, even with systems to address social handicaps, uh, and these are theoretically available to every citizen of India, no matter what their gender, caste, community, religion, and so on, right? We were also very lucky to get universal suffrage at the moment of independence. The minute we became independence, every Indian had the right to vote. Uh, but how does one go? How does one root democracy? How does one go beyond paper and articulation? How does one, build roots for democracy in a land where people over centuries, over thousands of years, have been used to feudal structures and deep caste discrimination? And I would like to put forward that the theaters that I've shared with you as just a few examples of the kind of work that happens in India are an effort to do just that. In their hands, theater becomes a means for self-awareness, self-confidence, awareness of societies and structures, community bonding, social responsibility, expanding of consciousness of performers as well as audiences. Um, can we say that this theater practice delivers immediate results? No, we can't say that. This such kind of simplistic cause and effect thinking does not apply to theater and performance. It is a cultural practice. It is a cultural conversation. What it is doing is shifting, is challenging norms, shifting behavior, opening consciousness. Um, for the theater person, there are many anecdotes. There you will see small shifts in behaviors. There will be stories. You will see how people are looking at something differently because you've been having this ongoing conversation with them over and over and over again. And the believer in the efficacy of theater sees this and continues working. And they continue seeding the possibility of change over and over and over again. I'd like to end by looking at what these theaters have been up to during the pandemic. As I said, the pandemic has really posed a severe challenge to theater practice across India. Just before the pandemic hit, you may have heard, there were countrywide protests against the new Citizenship Act proposed by the government. A number of these theaters, Jan Natya Manch, Buddhan Theatres, Jana Sanskriti, participated actively in these protests with their theater, bringing their practices into the protest sites. Um, in February 2020, just before the pandemic, there were riots in Delhi, mostly by Hindu mobs attacking Muslim localities. There were deaths and injuries. Many families became refugees overnight. Jannate Manch members participated in door-to-door surveys. They participated in surveys from the relief camps. The idea was to collect data of the injured, of the dead, and to use the raw data to put pressure on the government to act. They also fundraised for the riot victims. They fundraised as well for the workers who were suffering economically economically because of the pandemic, and they participated in delivering ration kits to people who needed food. More recently, in terms of their theater, they have started experimenting with the online space. The big question for them is how do we reach our audience who may or may not have mobile phones? If they have a mobile phone, it'll be shared. Women don't usually have access to the phones. And these are questions that are going on with them as they're experimenting with adding the online space as one of the spaces they reach out through performance and theater. In May 2020, during the pandemic, Jana Sanskriti in West Bengal, West Bengal was hit by the cyclone Amphan. You already had people suffering under the pandemic. The cyclone was massively destructive of a scale that we had not seen before, even though West Bengal is used to cyclones. So it really hit people with a double whammy. Over this time, Jana Sanskriti called in its international network and fundraised. They managed to support over 400 families for 3 months, providing them ration kits, providing them sanitary napkins. They also, with the help of their satellite teams, held camps across West Bengal, where they provided medical relief, where they provided support in rebuilding, in supporting house rebuilding. Today, as I speak to you, they're back on the ground. They have a play now on the migrant workers issue. I don't know if you have heard, but migrant workers are one of the worst hit people in the pandemic in India. They have returned now back to their homes. They've been performing plays for the migrant workers in West Bengal. Their plan is to take all the interventions of the migrant workers not only across West Bengal, but through their teams in the other states. And over a year, build a report based on these interventions and reach out to the legal community and through to the political community um, to try and push for changes in law that will provide protection to the migrant workers in the future. Budan Theatre has been creating and circulating, Budan Theatre has been creating and circulating video broadcasts over WhatsApp and social media. These video broadcasts are for them to deal with helping the DNT communities deal with rights and awareness during the pandemic. They are also collaborating on a University of Lancaster research study focusing on Charanagar for a year, and then for the next year, they'll be focusing on the other DNT communities in other states. This research is seeking to document and understand the issues of DNT communities during the pandemic and how they have survived. Ninasam and Katekudu Sangam have had to shut down their premises because they both have premises. They've had to shut down. On the top right, you will see an AGM being held with social distancing at the Katekudu Sangam. They've had to shut down their premises and therefore their schools during the pandemic. What they have both done is actively fundraised for the larger community and the people who are very closely associated with them, because in villages, the economic activity, well, across the country, the economic activity has come to, had came to a huge halt, and even now is very slowly sort of chugging back to life, perhaps. And there has been little to no help from the government. So with many other social players, these theatre groups have also been fundraising. So how is theatre an agent of change? After having said all this to you, how is theatre an agent of change? Can we claim that when you do a theatre play, change happens? I don't think any theatre person in their right mind would ever make that kind of a claim. A story told does not directly make change. You cannot draw a direct arrow from a story told to a certain change that happens. However, what Theatre for Change does, I believe, and at least the ones that I have shared with you, what it does, is it works to create the conditions for change, and its focus are people. The communities they identify, the groups they identify, and whom they want to work for. And what they do is they build in their theater. See, the thing about theater, which is different from film, is that the communication is two-way. It's always dialogic. Even when it's the Janam work, where it's street theater, with that audience around you, there is always a dialogue. It may not be verbal, but there's always something going back and forth between the performers and the audience, right? And what Theatre for Change does is it's very conscious of the community that it wants to work for. It creates plays. Why plays? Why not didactic communication? Well, people love stories. They are much more likely to listen to something through a play. If you make a good play, if you make an effective play, you're going to have people consider things in a certain kind of way. That you're going and saying, do this, or this is right, or giving a message is probably not going to work in the same way, especially, like I said, with people who are rooted in old civilizations. So what this Theatre for Change does is it builds a consciousness of culture, society, and people's place in it. And it works in solidarity with people, right? It is not a transactional exchange at all between the performers and the communities that they work with. These are not just audiences for them who buy tickets and then go away. And as you can see during the pandemic, the proponents of such theatre they cannot stop at simply performing. They will step beyond the bounds of performance to join other movements, to step up for the people involved. So Theatre for Change, I would say, is deeply embedded in community, deeply invested in community, and exhibits a deep solidarity with their chosen community. And the utterly beautiful thing is that so much of this solidarity is expressed through care and play via the medium of theatre. It's just fun over and above everything. And fun is really, really important. I'd just like to end by saying that for me, ultimately, Theatre for Change is really about the largeness of your heart. It is about politics. It is about democracy. Look at all that. It's also about the performers and the largeness of their heart. It's about who you care for, how you care, and how much ongoing work and effort you are willing to put in to translate that caring into transformative cultural action. I'd like to end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I hope I haven't run out of my time.
No, that's perfect. That's just perfect. We've got about 15 minutes, let's say, for Q&A. And you gave us a lot to think about. And I'm very glad that this has been recorded so that we can go over all the information that was given again. That was really fascinating. And well, as the moderator, I will assert my right to ask the first question. And then we've got a few people that have launched questions in the chat so we can deal with them. But one often reads, even in the West, in the newspapers, about unrest that occurs in India due to some Bollywood film. As people may know, the Indian film industry is one of the largest in the world. And sometimes when there's an issue that is transgressed in some way, people can get upset. And I'm curious, I mean, is there, especially for some of the more revolutionary groups that really transgress some of the social norms in their works, do we get a lot of threats or unrest that occur in relation to these groups, or are they kind of left more or less to do their performances, and if people disagree, they do it in a more non-violent way?
Well, so Jannat, they're not left alone. The threats, the attack often comes from political groups. It's not the public as much. Though nowadays political groups often take action by mobilizing mobs from the public, right? So for instance, Jannat Manch, the co-founder of Jannat Manch, Safdar Hashmi, was killed in an attack in the early 80s. They had gone to perform at a place called Jhandapur, and people from the goons from the Congress party had attacked their performance and chased the actors down. And Safdar, in trying to help everybody else get away, was brutally beaten and left for dead. And he did die. He died at a very young age, and we really lost a great thinker and artist. Utpal Dutt has stories about being attacked. He was about being attacked in Calcutta when he was doing plays that were questioning the establishment. Um, you know, uh, in terms of the Bollywood question, that you asked, in fact, Dakshin has just sent me a WhatsApp where he's protesting. He sent an open letter to one of the actresses in Bollywood for using slurring epithets towards Bhans who are a DNT caste. There is this kind of dialogue that keeps going on. My sense is, as we've been shifting right in India politically for some time, and see, the difficulty with theater is that people are meeting people. You can't control the conversation. You have a censorship act in India set up by the British and still prevalent in parts of India. But who's to say that the script I submitted and what I say on stage are the same thing? And how much are you going to police that? So there is always that element of danger in theater, and I often think that perhaps that is why establishments always distrust theater at some level, and that always carries with the element of gender. In India, unfortunately, sadly, for the last even before this government, there has been rising mob violence. A lot of censorship now is mob censorship, which is motivated by groups who see themselves as defenders of culture. So are these groups open to more and more violence? Yes. Do they take precautions to protect themselves? Yes. They have strong networks. They do build various kind of precautions into the way that they work. What will happen in the future, I don't know. This is far more true for the theater groups, the activist groups who are traveling from space to face. It's not as true for the institutions who are working at a much more subliminal culture, sort of shifting culture kind of way.
Right. Okay, thank you. Very interesting. All right, well, I'll look at the list. So Erin wanted to know a little bit more about the demise of the Indian People's Theatre, like some of the reasons behind the breakup of that early Indian People's Theatre.
So I want to start by saying I'm not a great expert on the IPTA. There are some lovely books that have come out that really capture their work. But I do believe one of the key reasons for demise is that, the IPTA, when it started, it grew out of the anti-fascist movement in Europe. And you had a progressive writers association that was set up in London, and then the Indian Progressive Writers Association, which then found voice in India as well. And the IPTA grew out of that kind of a tendency. Many of those artists then also became IPTA artists. And they were affiliated with the Communist Party of India because they were left leading, but they were just affiliated. They were not necessarily Communist Party members. What happened with the Communist Party, as far as I know, is that with the various international conferences, they became more and more rigid in what they considered art for social change. So while people with left and progressive tendencies were part of IPTA, their art started coming under question. Was it political enough? Was it message carrying enough? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of artists started leaving. And I think this was one of the key reasons. But those artists, like I said, it became a foundation because the artists left, but that attitude remained. So for instance, the group theater movement of Bengal, which is a very socially, has been in the past, a very socially thoughtful and committed theater practice. And Calcutta is has been full of such theaters, grew out of the IPTA tendency. You know, a lot of India has had, in urban areas, India has had social realistic theater, which is looking at social issues. And theater has seen that as a responsibility and a commitment to society. And that has definitely come out of an IPTA way of thinking.
Right, okay. Well, and Nathan wanted to know a little bit about the Dalit issue specifically. Is that a common issue? Dalit.
Dalits, okay.
Yes. Is that a particularly common issue that is dealt with in a lot of the revolutionary theater?
Okay, so again, I'm not an expert. For those who don't know, Dalits was a name taken on by castes that were often considered untouchable in India. I mean, caste is really a horror in India, and I'm not going to beat around the bush about it. And it's you know, like race, it's a horror that the privileged does not want to engage with. So upper caste, upper class people often would like to believe that since they don't suffer caste doesn't exist. They're not always very open to understanding that the reason they can think caste doesn't exist, the reason people like me can think caste doesn't exist, is because we don't actually suffer the atrocities of caste. There is a wonderful, I'm sorry, I'm going to take a slight side trip here. There's a wonderful photographer called Sudharak Olve, and I'm happy to share the name. Actually, I'll share the name in chat. And if you see his photographs online, and there are many other such photographers, he documents the atrocities done to Dalits due to caste, and he has recently set up a photography magazine that is encouraging young people to go and take these photographs. You know, but and it's quite what people have to. It's like what the Buddha theater says in terms of atrocities that the deity tribes have to deal with. This is daily. The caste discrimination is a daily practice in India. It comes across in very, very small ways, which the people who do the discrimination don't always see. Again, I'm not an expert, so please don't take me as the final word on this, but the person who headed the writing of our conversation was B.R. Ambedkar, who was from the Dalit community. And thank God he did that. Because he built into the constitution his understanding of caste discrimination in some sense, and he put in a lot of safeguards there, which is why I said we have a good document. How do we make it real? In his name, there is the Ambedkarite movement in India, which has been gaining in steam. And a lot of poetry has been part of the artistic expression of Dalit protest, of Dalit raising of social consciousness. You have had great, very powerful, very aggressive articulation by poets who get mass audiences. And in fact, they are what you call in Maharashtra, you call them lok shairs, people's poets. And the poetry is often sung and they play a big role. I do not know too much about Dalit theater, and I am sorry to say that urban theater from the, that you see on the sort of middle class urban stages does not, like I said, caste is not dealt with as an issue. It is left to be dealt with by the people who suffer caste. We have not, I feel there is still resistance for us to understand that all of us are complicit because of our history. People get confused about, like, I didn't make that happen. Well, that's not the point.
Right.
You have a history, you have privileges that come from there. And that large acceptance, which is why I'm making a direct relationship with race, that large acceptance that you are complicit in the system, and what awareness must you have in order to bring this into your communication, into your storytelling, right, into your being, into your practice in society. I don't think enough privileged upper castes take that responsibility in India. So it does not show up in our upper middle class theater as much. I'm sure there is a lot of, I mean, I know I have I know some wonderful work being done by young groups, and the work I know more is around poetry and music. I don't know so much in the space of theater.
Okay. One of the other people in the audience would like to know a little bit about some of the classical forms of theater in India. So in the West, we have opera, for example, that some people like going to, but it's kind of considered an outmoded form. So how alive are a lot of these traditional forms in India still today?
So the thing about a performance form is it can't live if it doesn't have an audience, right? I mean, theater and film are
Right.
different in that way. Like you can have a film live if nobody sees it. But
Right.
if nobody sees theater, it's just not living, right? So any form that is being practiced with even one audience member today is alive. And that would be my bottom line. Classical, however, is a term, it's a term concocted by a newly independent nation. I mean, let me try and do this in brief. India's idea of itself comes from a British story told about us. The post-independence India idea, the master narrative comes from a British story told about us, and that story says that we were great a long time ago, and then invaders came in and Mughals came in and all of this stuff, and we lost our greatness, and now the British have come and we will get back our earlier greatness. I haven't ever understood that logic, but that's part of the master narrative told. Um, and I would, without, again, I'm making connections that I have not done deep research on, but this is how I have seen and understood things. We needed, at the time of independence, the nation needed to say, here is our culture, and identified in a sort of representative way a number of performance forms in across the country, so that you had a classical form from other, different places, and said these are our classical dances. Now, historically, India also has this land, South Asia also has the oldest treatise on drama ever written, the Natya Shastra. And what is fascinating about the Natya Shastra is it makes no difference between theater, music, and dance. It's Natya Shastra includes all of that. So this concept of theater as a separate silo from dance is not there in the Natya Shastra. And interestingly, if you see most rural performances in India, you will not see that. Everything will be there in the performance. I often think of the Natya Shastra as responding to the performance life that was in India and a codifying of that instead. So the classical dances, so what is being called classical is something that has existed over time, but the nation decided to spotlight it, take interest in it. And therefore, a lot of middle class people jumped in. And there was a certain change that happened in the form that removed elements of sensuality, it's very problematic. Culture was cleaned up so that the nation could use it as a representation of itself. And at the same time, it's complex because culture was also shared. I mean, these classical dances were shared across India, and they are beautiful forms. So I don't want to knock them either. But they're living forms. They're living forms. The pressure on classical dance is that because they are seen as museum pieces of Indian performance culture, it is very hard for them to experiment and change. They won't get support to do that. They're supposed to sort of evoke in our minds some 2,000-year-old thing that we've never seen. And therefore, people like my brother is a classical dancer, he's a Kathak dancer, and therefore experimentation in the form, pushing the form often comes with a huge pushback from the sort of custodians or the gatekeepers of the form, because the form has come to mean something beyond performance. Naturally, most performance forms will evolve. I'll come back to the fact that no performance exists without an audience. So if you cannot evolve to hold the attention of your audience, you don't have performance, right? And what happens with this classical sort of framing of dance and performance in India is that you almost put a moratorium on evolution. I'm calling classical dance, but the reason I refer to the Natya Shastra is say that traditionally in India, you don't have such a clear divide between dance and theater. So Kudyatam and Kathakali would be considered both dance and theater because they have speech, they have music, they have movement, right? So they would be considered both. Kudyatam is over 2,000 years old. It still has an audience. It has a small niche audience, but it has an audience, I hope
I
that answers.
see. Yeah, no, that's very good. That's very good. So we're starting to run a little bit low on time. So I wanted to give you a chance. Well, we've got the chat. There's a few questions that we might not have time to answer in the chat, but we will print the chat out and we'll send it to you so you can at least see those questions if you want to answer them later. But I want to give in the last few minutes you a chance to just say a little bit about your own work in Janoon, for example. Could you say a little
Oh,
bit
God,
about
okay.
more about what they were doing? I want you to, how you've talked about all these other groups, I'd like you to talk a little bit, or one of the other SMART, or one of the groups that you want to
Sure.
talk about that you were
No, I'll
involved
talk
in.
about June because I think thank you, Daniel, for asking me that.
Okay.
I'll talk about June because I think June comes out of something that is very close to my heart. And June came out of a desire to share, the arts. Like India is so rich. We have such a rich performance landscape, but most of us don't have a sense of the kind of richness of culture and performance that we have. And it's something I would really like to share for a number of reasons. One, because I just love it. I think it's brilliant. It's fascinating. And performers are really fun people. They tend to be irreverent, which I like. Yeah, it's just a way of living in the world, which is very beautiful. But I also, my theater professor, Michael, is here, who is one of the big reasons why I'm not in the sciences and I'm in theater today. And I think he and the other people at MIT helped me understand theater as a form which is why you asked me to talk on this topic was lovely for me, as a form which really expands consciousness. In the making of theater or the receiving of theater, what you're really doing is taking a sort of pause from your everyday life and allowing yourself to travel into spaces and mind spaces that you would not necessarily make the time for otherwise. And you're doing it not just intellectually, you're doing it sensorially and stuff as well. So for me, the sharing of theater is really important for that as well. It is for me tragic that you have such a rich landscape, right? But we don't know enough about it. We don't have experience of it. But there is a third reason, which I don't know how well we've done. So I'm talking to you about Junoon conceptually, right? And that is with the push to the right in the world today, where you're sort of pushing back towards master narratives, you're sort of regressing back into saying one way, this way, right? The history of Indian performance is a history of syncretism. It is a history of people who have come, we used to, at a time when it mattered, we were a land of plenty. There was rivers, there was, things grew, the weather was nice, you could chill, so people came to India and they stayed. They didn't go away. The British were perhaps the first people who came for a very long time and never, some Britishers became Indians, but most of them stayed connected to the, to the mother country in some sense, and they didn't actually become part of the land in that sense.
Right.
And for me, the sharing of performance is also the sharing of that understanding of our country. I think it's a really important understanding to share that everything you're calling your culture today, right, has no pure root. It is coming from a mix of conversation, coming from a mix of cultures. And the brilliance of it is that that is possible and creativity has made that flowering happen. And that is what you're receiving and calling your own today, and that is who you are. And I think for me, that has become, it wasn't how I was thinking when I started June. Perhaps it was instinctively what I knew. But I think as we moved more and more right, that has become more and more important for me. So in June, we did various things. We tried to take stuff, performances to schools. We created things we called arts encounters, where we built performance interactions where you could also understand the performance, but also watch it. We had, regular conversations with artists and scientists. We tried to build patronage amongst the business community because the government doesn't really have schemes for evolving contemporary thinking in live performance. So these were things that we experimented with for about 8 years. And I think these are thoughts that will still drive my future work. I just have to figure out what next. Right now, I'm not clear about what next right now.
Right. I think a lot of us are not clear about what next right now. These days, there's so much upheaval in the world, both politically and with the pandemic, that this is an interesting time. But of course, when you have unusual times, it's also an opportunity for change to be pushed ahead. And we can already see changes in society that will probably stick around even after the pandemic.
Yeah, it's a time of, great stress, but also a time of great possibility, right? When you're put under pressures, when you become creative, you have no choice.
Yes.
And I think that's the space that a lot of us has been pushed into actually right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, this has been really interesting, and I thank you so much for coming to us all the way from Calcutta, India. And through the magic of Zoom, we were able to talk to you. Although I guess it's early morning there in India, but we had a really great time. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for staying and listening.
Yes, we had a great crowd. Thanks for coming, everybody. And of course, send any questions. If you think of questions later on, feel free to send me them and we can get them to Sameera. And
yes, I'd be happy to answer. And I shared my email ID, sameera@alum.mit.edu. So anyone who would like to write to me, I'm always open for theater conversations or culture conversations or other conversations. So.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you again.
All right, really wonderful. Thank you. Okay, well, we can chat a little bit as people leave. I just want people to know that if people have a pressing question, do you have 5 more minutes or do you want to?
I have time. It's early morning for me. Nobody's
so
awake.
People want to stick around just to ask a pressing question, but I want to officially end it because I know we had promised people that it would end,
Okay.
Officially, thank you for being here. It was really a wonderful talk and we're very lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it was
a pleasure for me. I have to say, I have doing this after a long time with the university community, through a university community, and it was actually lovely to have to get back to working on things like this. So thank you.
Yeah, you didn't feel rusty at all. It felt like you've given,
well, I'm a theater person.
Like
I know how to perform.
Yes, right. Exactly. So we have, Rob, do you want to say something about the slow theater group that we have here, just to let Sameera know about it?
Please.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I just want to second what Rachel said. Your talk was really fantastic. And I am a founding member of a local community theater group here in Chico called Slow Theater. So the idea was to put on shows that are mostly written originally, but that they are kind of like what you were talking about, directly rooted in the society, the culture, the conversations that are going on. And some attempt at an activist avant-garde theater that does everything organically. So from building our own stages and sets, making our own costumes, writing our own scripts, writing original music, choreography, etc. So we've been doing that for about 10 years now, and it's been fairly successful. We do a free theater festival in September here, and we've gotten as many as 2,000 people to come out for a free theater festival, which is pretty good for a town of our size. So, so I was very, very interested in the kind of activist bent and that idea of bringing the news to the village and sharing the arts with dispersing it to as many people as possible.
So Rob, if you're interested, I'm happy to introduce you to any of these guys. They would be really open to conversation. And then, I keep saying, I keep hoping when travel opens, people can actually meet and see each other's work.
Yeah.
And in fact, Jannate Munch, recently, a few years ago, did a whole tour of the US with their street theater.
Oh,
they were invited to a whole tour of US universities. So that, they had a really interesting engagement with a lot of universities. So that kind of stuff also does happen.
Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. That sounds amazing.
And they're lovely people. So.
Yeah, I agree with you. Theater people are amazing, and I really enjoy the energy and the irreverence and the spontaneity and so forth. Yeah.
That's what it's that when you're a theater person, you're so used to the idea of gathering that the inability to gather is really difficult. Yeah. So.
Well, Sameera, have you heard of the Burning Man Festival?
I have. I don't know too much about it, but I have heard about it. Yes.
We have a lot of people in Chico who go regularly. I don't know if any of them are here in the audience right now, but it's a very interesting phenomena where, again, it's a place that uses theater and performance to help people think in a different way. And people really do come back. Have you been there, Rob?
I haven't.
You have not, right?
I would love to go.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a whole community, and it really does affect people. They do come back changed. Like, I've really heard that those 7 days can change people a lot.
No, I often think back to when you're in school and what you remember. Like part of my work, when I think what you remember, you don't remember what you learned at classes. You remember the thing that sort of went deep into your head. So often often we remember the shows that came or the special people you interacted with, something that shifted or did something to your brain in certain kinds of ways. And I guess, it's that at one level, and then it's the ongoing conversations at another level that I think, I keep thinking those two things, like people would often ask me in Junoon work, how does it matter to take a show to schools just once a year? And I'd be like, well, if you take a really good show, it's going to stay in people's minds and it's going to keep coming back to them, and things are going to keep dropping inside them over time. It's not going to be immediate. Some of it will be immediate, but a lot of the other stuff will be like, oh, and it's that sort of that light bulb will keep going off. Uh, Sadly, people who don't associate with the arts don't always get that, you know.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's definitely the case. I mean, the arts has a special, and of course, that's why people get very upset when the government is under pressure. The first thing they always cut money to is the arts. And it drives us crazy because that's the last thing they should cut money to. They think like another accountant is going to make that much of a difference in the world. And I've got this whole thing where I'm very into computers and programming and stuff like that. And I mean, the thing is that mathematics and stuff, well, I know you went to MIT for that, that's important, but actually that stuff can be done by computers better than humans. It's precisely art where you've got to invest in human beings, not so much teach more people quadratic equations. You don't need more people that know them. What you need more people to know is the arts, because that's the one thing computers can't do better than humans. So I think that the priorities are completely muddled up.
Mhm.
India, the budget is very small for the arts anyway. It's like some micro bit,
Right, yeah.
So really, I mean, I'm also amazed at how performance in India survives, because performance is expensive, because, the people, they have to rehearse, they have to eat, they have to stay, they have to all of that stuff, right? And I'm constantly amazed. Like I look around at my colleagues and peers and I think, how do you survive? I think that all the time because there aren't really structures of survival, but somehow it happens. Patronage is got, people come forward. The kinds of generosity you see to make things happen is really huge.
Mhm.
So we don't have the luxury of, but we also don't have the pressure of waiting for government. We don't have the luxury of that, but we also don't have the, they're not
Right,
giving
there's
us
a
any.
freedom that comes with it.
Yeah, well, no, freedom is not there. There are enough eyes looking at you, but it's like you used to scrounging and finding ways to get some things done. It does hurt your work. It does mean that you have to create your work. I mean, I know friends who create sets so that they can be folded into the back of their car because you have to cut costs. And that's how you design. You don't design just aesthetically, you design so that your little car, which you can afford, can carry the set. So uh, that's part of the reality that happens as well.
Right.
So,
Okay. Well, Sameera, the theater program here at Chico is putting on a play called Breathe, about life in the pandemic. And it's going to be, all the students are at home, but they're acting in coordination with each
oh,
other.
lovely.
So I'm going to get you on the house
Please.
tickets to that, okay? And it's coming up in a week or two.
Very kind.
And
I would love to
I'd
see
like that to be our gift to you for coming to this talk. So again, thank you very much. I think that at this point we should probably let you relax and have your breakfast and enjoy your day. But again, and I'll send the comments to you as well, just so you can have it on record, and there might
Please,
be
I
some
would love
things
to
that
see it.
people
And like I said before, if people want to reach, converse on email, I'd be more than happy to.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So let's keep in
you.
touch, and thank you so much. This was really
Yes, and thank you
lovely.
everyone, and all of you who stayed back also. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.